This is the final in a series of lectures on the subject of death and dying, the sociology of death and dying, and we're going to discuss now the points that are raised in the Campbell article. While the basic thrust of the Campbell article as a journal piece is to argue in favor of a different point of view of how anthropologists and social scientists need to study death, that's not the reason that I've asked you to read it. The reason that I've asked you to read it is because in the course of making his argument on how others die, Campbell, in effect, reviews many of the subjects and topics that we've been talking about so far in the course. And it is in the process of making his argument and in the review of it that he raises a number of points that will help you get a sense of what are some of the more important and core issues that we've talked about. He begins by telling us, or reminding us, for us all of this is really a matter of a reminder, of reminding us of what distinguishes modern society from primitive society. When he tells us on page 178, students of death in contemporary society appear to agree on the fact that modern man suppresses thinking about death. And in effect, he's telling us that one of the characteristics of modern society is its self-confidence in its ability to somehow avoid death. We've seen that part of this is in the process of the medicalization of death. We've seen that this is, in effect, articulated most in characteristics of Western society, American society in particular, but Western society in general, whose approach is to be death-denying, that death is a sickness, that death is a problem, but that death ultimately is something that can be denied. It can be, if we haven't yet found the way to deny it, there is an opportunity that will come up in the future that will enable us to deny death. But beyond that, what I want to point out is some of the other sort of reviews of issues that we've talked about in and read about so far in the course. He tells us that one of the issues of death is that it has exercised human beings in all ages, that at all times, and as we suggested already, even for the most primitive of men, of human beings, death presented a huge challenge. What does it mean? How do we overcome it? How do we respond to it? The problem of death has very naturally exercised the minds of men in all ages. He quotes the famous anthropologist J.G. Fraser as saying, in a book called The Belief in Immortality. The title of the book, of course, is the answer to how death has exercised the minds of men of all ages. And that is, as we have seen, we have transformed, we as a species have transformed the experience of death into a belief in immortality, in a belief that death is but a transitional state. Some of the solutions to the problem, as Fraser puts it, though dressed out in all the beauty of exquisite language and poetic imagery, singularly resembled the rude guesses of savages. In other words, he tells us that even in religious ideas, what we are basically doing, and savages is the very unfelicitous word that in the past was used for primitive man or the elementary forms of life, what anthropologists once thought were the elementary or simple forms of life, that all of the beliefs that we have about immortality are guesses. They're not based on any kind of knowledge that we have, any kind of objective and rational knowledge that we have. And so the same guesses that savages, so-called savages, used among primitive peoples, the are our guesses. But we also have seen, and Fabian reminds us, that even among the most primitive of peoples, the attitude towards death is infinitely more complex than one would think. And one of the themes that we have seen so far, that Campbell's writing, did I say Fabian? I meant Campbell. No, Fabian, I'm sorry, Fabian. It's not important that you remember that this is only Fabian saying it, because what Fabian is doing in this article is quoting lots of the others that we've read. That one of the things that we have seen so far is that among primitive peoples, many of the complex feelings that we have towards death are really acted out and shown to be much more sophisticated psychologically and sociologically than we ever would have guessed. He tells us and reminds us what Malinowski tells us, that the attitudes towards death is not only complex, but much more akin to our own than is usually assumed. And that's another important point, that we've seen that our study of primitive responses to death is a way of seeing in these more elementary forms aspects and attitudes and beliefs and responses to death that are very much like our own. The ceremonial of death, which Malinowski has told us, that ties the survivors to the body and rivets them to the place of death, that in a sense brings them together, rivets them to the place of death, the beliefs in the existence of the spirit, in its beneficent influences or malevolent intention. All of those beliefs that Malinowski reminds us, and that Fabian here, quoting Malinowski, reminds us to think about. In the duties of a series of commemorative or sacrificial ceremonies. In all this, and here is the key sentence, the key clause, we've said it before, in all this, religion and the religious practices surrounding death counteracts the centrifugal forces of fear, that is, the forces that would drive us apart, centrifugal forces that drive us outward, the feelings of dismay, of demoralization, and provides the most powerful means of reintegration, or what we call the centripetal forces, reintegration of the group's shaken solidarity. What has shaken their solidarity? The fact of death. Religion provides, and the rituals and the beliefs surrounding death provides means of reintegration of the group's shaken solidarity and of the reestablishment of its morale. And we can see that, as Malinowski has summarized it, Hertz has told us this as well, Fabian reminds us by quoting a variety of other anthropologists, all of them see in religion and the religious responses to death a way of overcoming centrifugality, of disintegration, and aiding in reintegration. There are other aspects of what we learn about, or what we have learned about regarding death in this article, and certainly one is that there's a social grounds upon which the reactions to death occur. The increasing power of the human being over nature has made the notion that somehow we can simply suppress the notion of death possible. That is, we can see through the process of all of these rituals that they, in a sense, seek as not only a goal of bringing people together, but also suppressing the nature of death, inverting it. Another of the points that we've made is that many of the meanings of the cultural responses to death can be subsumed under the concept of inversion. We take what is one thing and turn it into another. So that is more or less what we want to make of the Fabian article. It is describing